Hi, good afternoon. How's everybody? Good, good. You can hear me because you're responding. And my name is Reverend Debbie Weatherspoon. I serve this congregation as their pastor. And on behalf of the congregation of Epworth United Methodist Church and our staff, we welcome each and every one of you. We are so delighted to be partners in the community with Ashby Village, and we welcome you all here to this space. And while my last name does have the word weather in it, I do not control it. And I'm very sorry. However, I will apologize on behalf of weather that it is humid in here. And I'm glad you're finding ways to keep yourself cool. But we are here to be inspired and encouraged. And so without any further ado, I would like to invite Bab Freiberg to come. She is Executive Director of Ashby Village to also welcome you.
Welcome. We're so excited to be here, and thank you, Pastor Weatherspoon, for your words and for holding this event in your beautiful, beautiful church. It's really an honor to co-host this deeply relevant talk by our renowned author, Arlie Hochschild, on her latest book, Stolen Pride. It offers us such needed insights today into what divides our country and how we might heal this divide. For those of you who don't know Ashby Village, we're a vibrant community of older adults and volunteers of all backgrounds who are transforming how we age. We make it possible for older adults to age at home with self-determination, with community, and with purpose. I'm hearing a ringing. I don't know if others are. Thank you. If you aren't already, please join us as a volunteer, as a member, or both. Like today's art and culture program, our programs are offered free of charge so they're accessible to everyone. If you're able to support our programming, please do. There are opportunities. If you're on Zoom, there'll be a link in the chat where you can give. And at the back of the church, there are many ways that you can donate. We will be grateful. Before I turn it over to Ashby Village member and volunteer extraordinaire, Irene Marcos, who will introduce Dr. Troy Duster. A huge thank you, Irene, for the tremendous dedication and skills that you put together to make this event possible. Irene.
Thank you, Bab. Can everybody hear me? Okay? Okay. Well, thank you so much to Epworth, Pastor Weatherspoon, Paul Nassman, who's our technical guru, and especially to Susan Jardine for being such a generous and welcoming partner for Ashby Village and presenting this and other arts and culture events in the past. I also want to thank Sigrid Duisberg and Rondi Saslow for all the work that they did putting this event together. They work with me and other volunteers to create all the arts and culture presentations for Ashby Village. Today, we're pleased to present Arlie Hochschild in conversation with Troy Duster. Arlie's much anticipated book, Stolen Pride, Lost Shame, and the Rise of the Right, has just been published. We are fortunate to be able to listen in and gain a greater understanding of the social issues and politics of our troubled times. When you arrived today, you were given the opportunity to write a question for Troy or Arlie. There'll be volunteers that will pick up the questions and hand them to Troy and Arlie when they stop their conversation. So what I'd like to do is introduce Troy. It's my pleasure to introduce him. He's Arlie's friend and colleague. Both Arlie and Troy are professors emeritus at UC Berkeley. Troy is the past president of the American Sociological Association, and Troy will be introducing Arlie. He's also, by the way, a leading authority on genetics, and he founded the Institute for the Study of Social Change. So I will invite Troy up Well, he doesn't need to come up because he's
Yeah.
seated comfortably, and we'll begin our program. Thank you very much for supporting us, and we'll talk later before I have some other announcements at the end of the presentation.
Yeah. Okay, it's my privilege and honor to introduce my colleague of more than 5 decades.
Yeah.
You can't hear. We were concerned about that. Shall we use a handheld mic instead? You can hear me now.
Yes, now,
Okay. All right. I was saying that Arlie and I have been colleagues and close friends for over 5 decades. She's the author of 7 books, the most recent of which you just heard. But before that, Strangers in Their Own Land sold over 100,000 copies. In the several books that Arlie wrote before Strangers, she had established herself and burnished a reputation as being a pioneer in contributing to a unique field of investigation. So let me provide some background and context for what I'll call Arlie's signature contributions. They earned her, for example, induction into California's Hall of Fame this past year. Now, a good part of social science research emphasizes a set of ideas that indeed are the core for those disciplines. And I would like to present the case that almost each of these fields has a core set of ideas which can be called the canon. Let's take, for example, economics. The canon would be the rational actor who makes an assessment cost-benefit. In law, there is the notion of the reasonable person who makes an assessment about, as a juror, what would any reasonable person do under these circumstances? It's true in political science, it's true in several disciplines. That's called the canon. Now, Arlie comes along and she does what I'll call a canonoscopy. She decides that the problem with most of these disciplines is that there's insufficient attention to and room for human emotions, not just the rational actor, not just cost-benefit analysis, but humans also have something called emotions. And what's missing from most of the canons is a close examination of the emotions. Her earliest work talked about and dealt with, along with Thomas Schiff and a few others, what could be called the sociology of emotions. To link emotions to the action that was, quote, otherwise ignored. Okay. Just a word or two about her first book, Sociology of Emotions, in which she talked about how airline, at that time they called them stewardesses, not flight attendants, were asked to do things in the course of their job that required them to, quote, sit on their emotions, suppress them, not engage, to be continually affirming with a smile. A suppression of emotions, and therefore, in behalf of the task at hand, the work at hand was to be pleasant. And then she goes into an extraordinarily rich detail about what this does to the relationship between the flight attendant, the passenger, and so forth. Now, today's timing, in which we'll talk about Arlie's newest book, is impeccable. The timing is impeccable. Why? Because the New York Times decided today to publish a review of Arlie's book that you can read online if you don't get the New York Times. So I recommend that, but now you're going to hear directly. So I wanted to begin by asking Arlie to deal with the question of the start of this project. How was it that she suddenly found herself in rural Kentucky and Appalachia?
Okay. Let me just first say that Troy saved my, oh dear. Okay. Now, how about this? No? Okay.
Move, yeah, move that. You're on now.
That's weird. Okay. Now you can hear me. But am I too loud? Okay. Sounds loud. Let me just first say that the guy to my left here saved my job at Berkeley. And he, he established the Institute for, was then called Social Problems, Change. And where I hung out and did all my research, so was my moral home. And so that's Troy. So how did I get to Appalachia? Well, I had just finished Strangers in Their Own Land, which was centered in the Deep South in Lake Charles, Louisiana. I'm feeling very discouraged when one day the phone rang and it was Ro Khanna, who, okay, he's a Democrat. He's a congressman that represents Silicon Valley. And I didn't know why he was calling, but he said, okay, I'm a Democrat, Silicon Valley. Half of my constituency are people of color. I'm a person of color myself. They're immigrant. I'm an immigrant myself. But I crossed the aisle and made an arrangement with Hal Rogers of Congressional District Kentucky 5, which is the whitest and second poorest in the nation. And I've got jobs coding cell phones for apps. I've got jobs that it just takes 6 months to learn how to do. And they've got unemployed coal miners. How about getting jobs to coal to coding? Was I interested in looking at this? Well, I've been discouraged by the news and I thought, absolutely yes, when can I come? So that led me to a coding program in Louisville, Kentucky, and talking to young people who had come from the hollers in coal mining areas where the jobs had gone out. And I went to Eastern Kentucky to visit them, and we would meet at gas stations and in the hollers, sometimes in trailers. And I thought, whoa, this is an interesting place. So for a while, I kind of floated around. And until I got to Pikeville, it's kind of a hub town. And coal jobs out, opiate crisis in, neo-Nazi march coming to town. I thought, oh no, this is a perfect storm. Let me stop and start interviewing. That's how I got there.
Okay. Early on in the book, you delved into the relationship between shame and pride, a kind of danse macabre, how to do it. I wondered if you'd say a little bit about what that relationship is, shame and pride, and how it's so central to what you were to write about in the book.
Yeah. We have many emotions, but pride and shame seem to me the emotions most vulnerable to being tapped by charismatic political figures. What is pride? Pride and shame are on a continuum, and I think of it as kind of the skin of the self. It's what we think others think of us. It's not what we think of ourselves. That would be guilt, you know. But but our read on the opinions of others, and it's painful for everybody to feel shame. It's pleasurable to feel pride, and I got interested in it because I thought it was being exploited.
It's the relationship between the two that I wanted to ask you to focus on. In the early part of the book, there is this connection between them. Like, is it like either or? You either have shame or pride?
Yeah, no, certainly not. And there are many different bases of pride that we put together. And what I was sensing is that this was a community in which was sinking, was falling down. And in a way, it was a local story that was an exaggeration of a larger national story for whites without BAs. And that story involved loss. And then loss could become, and they're proud people, but very individualistic people. Like if they succeeded, that was me that did that. And if they failed, you know, it was I that am to blame. So I came to talk about a pride paradox, that in a sense, you're looking at people in a downward mobility, kind of a tough economic fall, but they're applying to it a culture of pride where they blame themselves. Meanwhile, we in blue states, better economic news, and we're actually easier on ourselves because we have a more circumstantial culture of pride. So if you fall down, you say, well, my sector is out. You blame yourself to some extent, but they take sociology classes. These are BA people that are kind of looking more at the whole circumstantial situation. So what we have in Kentucky Congressional District 5 are people who have high kind of old-time individualism where they blame themselves if things go wrong. And things do go wrong. Maybe I could just read from a guy who kind of explains this. Okay. I asked a man who was had been 12 years a heroin addict, and he was recovering when I met him. Actually, he was homeless when I met him. And is now, you'll be happy to know, doing much, much better. Okay. I asked him about loss and shame. He said, shame comes gradually. Let me give you an example of guys around where I live, which is Turkey Creek, Kentucky. First thing, the guy gets his layoff slip and he blames the inspector, then the supervisor. Then he shakes his fist at the Obama administration for putting in the Clean Air Act and adds in Biden and the Democrats and the deep state. Then, when his unemployment runs low and his wife asks for money for groceries for the kids, he faces a hard choice. If you need money and don't have a degree, you've got to leave. But his family's here and he doesn't want to leave. That's when he starts to feel bad about himself. He looks around at the jobs on offer at $9 an hour, and he turns up his nose at what he thinks of as girly jobs, service jobs, because he can't support his family on that kind of money. But then his partner says, we need to feed the kids. So he takes the crap job, and she says, there's still not enough money for food, gas, and fixing the roof. I'm just going to talk like this. Then if he gets into drugs, take it from me, he's ashamed. That can lead to divorce and separation from his kids, and now he's on the dole. He always felt superior to others he saw on the dole, and now he's on it too. So he's ashamed about that and mad that he's made to feel ashamed. Then he may read some op-ed in the Appalachian News Express calling people like him deadbeat for not supporting his family and paying taxes the town needs for sewer repair. He's not a contributor. On top of all that, he sees on the internet people outside the region firing insults at him as ignorant, racist, sexist, or homophobic. Now he's mad at the shamers. And by this point, he's forgotten about shame. He's just plain pissing mad.
Okay, so this sort of reminds me of a book that was written about the Great Depression by Robert Cooley Angel. And in that book, he describes how men, in particular men, felt shame because they could not get a job.
Right.
Now, imagine that situation. It is the Great Depression. Unemployment is extraordinarily high, and yet individual males are getting depressed psychologically because of the larger structure of economic depression. The reason I want to bring that comparison up is because, as we all know, the Great Depression ended, and a lot of the votes went for a Democrat called Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Well, now the question is, we have this equivalent of a depression in this arena, namely coal mining, and yet in this arena, 80% of the votes are going for Trump. 80% of the votes in the area that you studied went for Donald Trump. Could you just make a comment on what you think is going on there?
Yeah, wonderful question. Yeah, and we had FDR, and we had about 80% in Kentucky 5 went for FDR, and they went for Clinton, Bill Clinton. So what happened? In both cases, you had shame. In both cases, you had loss, but in one cases, it was used. Well, maybe it was used in both cases, but I think in a way it could have gone another way. It could have gone another way.
The current situation or the one in the Great Depression?
No, well, I'm speaking of the current situation. But backing up, I think there are failures in the Democratic Party, and which does not speak to this constituency. So a negative there. And I think that Donald Trump has become, in a way, the shame president, and that he has successfully taken this sense of upset and unhappiness and turned shame to blame. So I think it's a combination of failures on the one side and success on the other. And with regard to how he did this, shall I go into that? Yeah. I think that Donald Trump is a personally shamed person, harsh father, and probably doesn't read, you know. And that would be neither here nor there, except that I think it has given him a great acuity in spotting a structural shame in a downwardly mobile, white, blue collar sector of society, and a sector that's been in the last 2 decades of lost income and property, both absolutely and relative to educated whites and relative to blacks, with or without BAs. So it's a sector that's kind of feeling a loss of jobs, a loss of the kind of a devaluation of what it's good at. And it's also looking out, how come these other sectors are doing so well? Now that it had in common with the Great Depression. But I think Donald Trump has provided a kind of a 4-moment anti-shame ritual. And it goes like this. Moment 1, Donald Trump says something transgressive, like all migrants are poisoning the blood of America, or all Asian migrants are eating pet dogs and cats. Okay. Transgressive statement. Moment 2, the punditry shames Donald Trump. You can't say something like that. We're an immigrant society. You're president. How could you possibly say that? Or that's a lie. How could you repeat it? Okay. Moment 2, shaming of Trump for transgressive statement. Moment 3, Donald Trump becomes the victim of the shamers. Oh, look how this hurts. This is really tough. You know, taking all these hits from one source or another. Have you felt like that too, you, my followers? Yeah, it hurts, doesn't it? But I'm taking the hit for you, okay? So I'm a victim, but for you, okay? Moment 4 is Trump's roar back. And he vilifies immigrants, refugees, high-paid public sector workers, blacks, women. The list has grown longer. Each moment has changed, actually, as his narrative goes on through the years. But I believe that the Democratic side of America is listening to 1 and 2, the transgressive statement and the shaming, and that Republican America is listening to moment 3 and moment 4, which is Trump as a victim of shamers and his tremendous roar back. And in the course of this, shame has been moved to blame. It's been legitimated. The feeling rules have been changed on people. So if they were doing it privately, now that was okay. And they could do it publicly.
In the book, you mentioned something called the pride paradox. Thanks. It's on. It's on. Okay. In the book, you mentioned, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. The pride paradox. And I wondered if you'd spend a few minutes describing what you mean by the pride paradox.
Yes. I sort of did. It's when you blame yourself for the bad news that you had to cope with.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that makes them a prime target for this anti-shaming ritual. Meanwhile, we who don't face the same hard economic news also are less hard on ourselves. Yeah.
Okay, well then, I guess I want to segue into what you did in the Strangers in Their Own Land, which is to talk about what you called a deep story.
Yeah.
And is there, in your framing, a deep story here?
Yes. You know, one of the people that I interviewed, the mayor of Coal Run, who describes himself, well, Coal Run is 2 shopping malls on each side of Route 23, and that's Coal Run, and we're very proud of our area here. And he said, you know, I've had a look at your last book. That's the danger one runs. And you talk about this deep story and about a man who's waiting in line for the American dream, which is ahead, but just over the brow of the hill. And the line is not moving. And the man does not look behind him at the very long line behind him. He's just looking at the short line between him and the American dream. It's not moving. And his feet are getting tired. He says, I'm not a person of malice, but I just am impatient to get to the American dream. And then he notices these line cutters. Well, who are they? They are Blacks, they are women, they are immigrants, they are refugees, they are even well-paid public sector workers, and they are endangered species. I got told, you know, the liberals value animals more than us. So all of these line cutters are putting him back, he imagines, and in the original deep story. And the President Obama at the time is waving them forward. So the man thinks, oh, they're his constituency, and he's not representing me. So that is kind of the original deep story. This man read the book. He said, you know, is something wrong, something missing there? In the line, there's a bully, and that bully is pushing for against coal, and he's taking our jobs away, not giving us any new ones. It's the bad bully. But in line also is the good bully. We know he's not a perfect person. He lies, he cheats, he's, you know, not a nice guy, but he's our bully. That's the update to the deep story.
Yeah. You know, I mentioned at the outset that most academic disciplines in the social sciences assume the notion of rationality. In literature, it's different. French novelist Marcel Proust has an extraordinary passage in one of his novels, which he talks about how people who are not very successful find themselves fighting internally between, quote, their emotions and their intellect, or their rational selves. And this fight goes on and on all their lives. And he said, the healthy person, this is Proust speaking, the healthy person has the intellect or the rationality, say, to the emotions at your service. Now, I don't go that far, but I do think there's something here with respect to this whole idea of the internal conflict between parts of the self that are feeling shamed by what has happened to them, and then the desire for pride to go for what? Well, in the case that you mentioned in the first third of the book, it's all about this march of white nationalists.
Yeah.
And so the pride then moves into this direction of, we'll show them, we'll show ourselves as well, that we have pride in our whiteness. And the thing about the book that you've just written is the extraordinarily rich examination, a characterization of how different people in this part of Appalachia responded to the cry for pride and whiteness, that what was being offered to them in this great the march in Pikeville was pride. And what you see in each of the pages that you've written is a finely textured account of why so many people in Pikesville said no. Now, the reason why I bring this up is because it will surprise many in the audience to hear that the same person who was the organizer of the white nationalist pride parade march in Pikesville, which you did your research, 3 months later becomes the head of the Charlottesville march, where there are thousands and thousands of white males who move into this zone. And I would like for you to say something to this particular audience about this person whom you spent a lot of time with.
Okay. This was Matthew Heimbach, his name is. And I asked him if I could talk to him and what his plans were. And he was eager to talk, yeah. People don't know, really my story. He was on the spectrum, I discovered very bright, talked in paragraphs, and had a great allergy to shame. I will not be shamed, insulted. My father, my last name is German, and my father's German heritage. My mother comes from a Southern family, Confederate heritage, but I will not be shamed, he said. People made fun of my last name. I was a tubby kid, kind of like that. And he said, I came from a very normal middle-class childhood. I grew up in a McMansion in Cheswell Street. He came nowhere from Appalachia itself, but he felt Appalachian. He came to wish he were an insider and wanted to borrow their rationale. So I'll give you a little sense of how he talks. He moves smoothly from his account of his life into a rant against his real and imagined critics. The left are eternal victims. They worship victimhood. And the flip side is they are big guilt trippers. And they rely on the farm boys from Tennessee to uphold a system that lets them run their mouths. Who are these bourgeois folks coming to tell us in Poolsville who our mascot should be? He's speaking about an earlier grievance he had. So that's kind of, you get the sense of cocky and extra punitive, we would say, kind of character. So I would say paradox is my favorite word. And the paradox is that he brought his marchers, some 20 different radical right groups, white nationalist groups, to a Pikeville. Everybody dressed to the arms, and in Kentucky you can go around with loaded guns, no checks, and the city fathers were terrified there would be violence. Homeland Security had warned them, because it's saying that this could really be violent. And what happened was the people of Pikeville said, no. I mean, we're not fascist. And you see these hills, they're full of graveyards. Our grandfathers fought and died against Hitler. We don't want, you're going to bring us down even further than we are. No. Okay. So why do I use the word paradox? Is because while they said no to Matthew Heimbach, two things, who was to change his mind about what he said in Pikeville. And number two, they saw Donald Trump, who they thought of as far more moderate, go gradually forward, increasingly right until he embraces the far right, Proud Boys, and invites neo-Nazis to Mar-a-Lago. So they said no to fascism with one face and yes to fascism with the other face.
The other character in the book that I found fascinating was Timmy Ratcliffe.
Yes, yes.
Could you say what it was about him that caught your attention and made it such a feature of your understanding of this arena?
Yeah. There's a little connection actually to the Institute for Study of Social Change. Another way that I actually got interested in Pikeville has to do with Tommy Ratcliffe in the following sense. Once I was, just going back to your first question, once I was in Pikeville looking around, there's a little university there, University of Pikeville, and I noticed there is a criminologist and sociologist there. So I knocked on the door just to see what was happening and met a sociologist. I invited him for lunch and we got talking, and he said he was really interested himself in online extremism. And he said, oh, I really like Berkeley. I'd like to come and visit you. I said, well, terrific. I'll arrange a talk at the Institute for the Study of Social Change. And Larry Rosenthal is here, who heads up a small important Center for Right-Wing Studies, and I arranged for him to give that talk. And he came with a man named Tommy Ratcliffe, long hair. And the first time I met Tommy, he was looking at ISSC, and he said, I think this is it. He said, you know, I came from Blackville. I've never been in an airplane before. It was scary. So he was kind of just right out there. Wonderful man, highly insightful. And so he had come as the research assistant of the sociologist who gave the talk and was my second entree into Pikeville. And so gradually through time, Tommy was to unpack for me his own personal story of which was 2 generations of loss. His grandfather had been a coal miner and a decorated hero, World War II. His father had been a guard at a mine, lost that job, worked in a garden supply place, lost that job, took to drink. Both his parents became alcoholic. And he then also developed that problem. And he made his way up. But when he met Matthew Heimbach, and Tommy kind of became my companion. He went with me to have lunch with Matthew Heimbach, and I would say, tell me, what do you think about this guy? And he began to describe how an extremist could dig into his own sorrows and turn things around. He said, well, you know, I dropped out of college. I tried a community college, but I'm not used to talking to people. There were no office hours. There were no teaching assistants. I took a chemistry course. It was hard. I flunked out. And that this, the neo-Nazi could say, yeah, that's what colleges do. They make you flunk out. They just don't have any use for you. Or when he was turned down by a girlfriend, yeah, that's what they're like. These girls say, oh, it's a biracial girlfriend. She's going for the other guy. They just let you go. In other words, each little moment of disappointment throughout his life, he could imagine how that could be turned and blamed. That shame could be turned at each moment to blame. And at the end, he said, so Matthew Heimbach, I should say he was an alcoholic, recovering alcoholic, and back on his feet now. But he said at the very end, so Matthew Heimbach would be just handing me a drink.
Let's bring this up to date. Indeed, yesterday, there was a comment that has gone viral in some circumstances about Stephen Miller and J.D. Vance, and both said, real men, alpha men will vote for Trump. Beta men will vote for Harris. That's a quote.
Yeah.
I mean, if that isn't about your version of what happens with people in terms of what is prideful, what, you know, the
right.
climbing on of what real men can't vote for Harris.
Yeah,
And that's out there.
right. You know, there seemed to me in this election two models of manhood. One is Trump and the other is Tim Walz. And I've had the idea proposed, and I think there's a lot to it, that a lot of Trump followers had abusive fathers. And they think, oh, yeah, well, yeah, that's dad. That's how he is. He slaps you, you know, and I'll love you, you know, in some confusing, terrible way. And that Waltz is just the opposite. He's the kind of the good dad. So my husband, in an optimistic moment one morning, says, well, even the sons of bad dads wish they had a good dad. I'm not sure how much to hope to put on that. But there is a fake version of pseudo-masculinity that's out there, and 20% of Black men are now ready to vote for Donald Trump on those grounds, I think.
One only gasps with disbelief that I'm not sure what the best strategy is for the remaining period, but I know you've got a few passages there which you marked up and might want to at least pick your favorite one.
Yeah. I met a guy who isn't a Democrat, but I thought should be. And I'd like to introduce you to him. His name is David Maynard. And when I first met him, he said, I'm trailer trash, okay? But here's how he describes himself. Two passages. We were talking about Blacks and whites one day. And he says, on the news, you hear a lot of talk about race, but not a thing about poverty. neither party is really telling it like it is. Growing up, I asked him, had he gotten to know any Black kids? In our elementary school, we just had a few Black kids. One was Alan, and our bus driver had adopted him. And Alan always told me the way I talked about Moore's Trailer Park, where I grew up, made it sound a lot like a neighborhood in Detroit, where he grew up. I've never been to Detroit, Michigan, but I'll bet Alan's family's is a street version of Moore's Trailer Park. If you look at a white trash person and you look at a ghetto trash person, there's no difference. Bad jobs, if any, drug addiction, drug trade, crime in jail, ripped up families, fights. When I was a baby, I had a gun pointed right at me. Cops are harsh here, like cops are harsh in Detroit. When I heard Reagan complain about welfare queens, I didn't know that applied to Black women. We have welfare queens, my family included. You know, the Black comedian Dave Chappelle, he jokes about the poor Black experience. You see a toddler asking for crack. It's the same in Martin County, maybe not crack, but pain pills. He said, actually, there's no difference between us. We're poverty people, except for the music. We have twangy, tragic string, and they have rap. So I asked some other people that I was interviewing, what do you think about that? And another guy said, oh, haven't you heard about hillbilly rap? But this David talked about narratives. I just want to, he said this. We think in narratives. Here is a guy who quit grade, he was diagnosed with a learning disability and barely got through high school. He's talking about narratives here. We've got two main ones, and people like me don't fit either one. First, you've got a white middle class narrative. You hear these success stories. A person comes from nothing and he gets to something. So you say, congratulations. But you look at a guy who says he came from nothing and you see something, he had something to start with. Then you have a second narrative for Blacks, and people say, oh, you're a Black person, that means you're poor. You didn't have something to begin with, and you don't have something now, and that's because you're a victim of racism. But that leaves a problem for people like me. If I'm a Moore's Trailer Park white trash person, the only narrative I have tells me that I'm white and I'm privileged. So that's something I have. And that must put me ahead. But what if it doesn't put me ahead? I'm not left with nothing because of racism. I'm left with nothing because I'm lazy and stupid. And then he ends by saying, and if I were to say this out loud to a liberal, they would accuse me of racism. So he ends up saying, don't confuse me with Donald Trump and all his nonsense. He's just a rich guy helping other rich people. But the left to him had disappeared into identity politics. He didn't feel recognized and felt he would be criticized if he asked for recognition, basically. So my sense was, you know, there is a long history. It's not a mainstream history of attempts to cross racial divide and focus on on poverty, and most recently, Reverend, there's an author of, help me here, William Barber, who's just written a book called white poverty. So where is that tradition, and why does he feel that way? Why doesn't, if I were to make one recommendation for the Harris campaign to Kamala, would be to reach out to a guy like this and say, y'all come, hey, we are talking not just about the middle class, but about the poor and of all races.
We should probably bring this to a close shortly, but maybe because we're talking about the next 2 to 3 weeks and what's possible, maybe you could say a few words about what you would suggest is possible.
Okay, it's the time is ripe, and it's never too late. And I know that Ashby Village itself has a postcard gathering on October 16th from 10 to 12. So I would encourage everybody to join that. And get yourself to a swing state, we have Nevada is 4 hours away. Our neighbor is in Michigan. My granddaughter is now in her second year at Occidental in college in Los Angeles, and they have something called campaign semester, and she is going door to door in 110-degree heat in Phoenix, Arizona. So postcards. Yeah, that's what I think. One person has said, oh, I'm just one person. What can I do? Climate change, politics. And the thing that's an answer to that is don't be one person, join a group. And now would be the time to do it.
Thank you. I've read this book from cover to cover, and I can testimonial that is an extraordinarily richly designed account of what goes on in a place that most of us will never get to talk to people the way Arlie has. And she has a skill to get people to talk to her in ways that I can't even imagine doing. But I would like to therefore recommend that you read this book. It is extraordinary. With that, I think there's going to be a book signing. You want to say a little bit about what that will be? Where, when, who has it? Someone from Ashby Village has the details about the book signing?
Oh, questions.
No questions? Surely.
Oh.
Thank you.
So I guess now will be a time for some question and answer.
Let me just say that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, the first question was, if you project forward 10 years from now, where are we?
Oh, that will depend on, I believe, the responsiveness of people like us to the dilemma that we face. We are living in a very divided society. I believe that the left is both receding and that we're not good at reaching across the aisle. I think that labor unions used to be the main structure that connected the working class with the Democratic Party. But that we are now down to only 9% of the private sector who are represented by labor unions. I think in the 70s, 80s, offshoring basically took factories out and undercut labor unions. And so the task ahead, next decade, is to either build back labor unions or create a structure that is functions in that kind of way. I also believe that those of us educated urban people who generally tilt liberal left are actually less good at reaching across. This comes as a surprise to many of us, but research shows that liberals, when faced with a person who says something they disagree with, is more likely to cut off contact than conservatives are likely to cut off contact. Whites cut it off more than blacks. So that's something to work on. And paradoxically, again, my favorite word, studies show that conservatives are more likely to change their mind or change their feelings about someone on the other side if they sit down opposite and get a whole feel of the whole person. So when you put together the kind of fragility of liberals' desire to reach across with what a more rural, semi-rural population requires to really alter their views or feelings, we get the situation we're in. And I believe what I've tried to do in this book is to make us all bilingual so we can read feelings and not, we don't just speak rationality, we speak and hear feelings. And with that, once sensitized, we need to both rebuild a union structure or something like it and personally reach across that aisle.
That may be a good place for the second question, which is, how did your interviewees respond to you and your project?
They were curious. I mean, when they first met me, I'm an open book. I say, hi, I'm Arlie Hochschild from Berkeley, California. Berkeley. Woo. And then they'll say, you know, but people are very prejudiced against us. They have stereotypes about us. They think we're dumb hillbillies and so on. And I said, well, I know something about stereotypes. People have stereotypes about Berkeley, California. And then we had that in common. And, you know, I tell them, anything you want to know about me, I'm happy to talk about it. But the curious thing is, once you get them going, they're not that interested in me. They're kind of really interested. The other thing I think is they get really interested in being recognized. Honestly, what I do is easy to do. There is no secret to it. You just have to be curious and open, and that's not hard.
Well, that's a segue to the next question. You seem gentle in your approach to people who feel shame. How do we show respect to bring people with shame back into the community?
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love the question. It's a gentle question. Whoever wrote that question does it herself, himself. You know, what the news covers is harshness and opinionatedness. And you get a feeling that people are mean and opinionated. They are opinionated. I'm opinionated. But there's, people have soft sides. I mean, one of the harshest people that I interviewed for this book, he was the head of the Eastern Kentucky Patriots that organized a 22-mile vehicle parade in 2020 pro-Trump. And he felt Donald Trump had been sent by God. And he took me to look at the graveyards where his ancestors lay. And he knew his ancestry. I mean, I don't have a memory like that. It's just amazing. And at one point, we entered a little church, and he said, this church, it's an old Baptist church, and he said, you'll notice that there are no hymnals here. We were illiterate. And so the minister would say something and the congregation would repeat. The minister would say something, the congregation would repeat, and that songs were sung that way. I felt this guy that was so tough and hard was very open about the things that he was also ashamed of.
Well, it's a segue into this next question, which is, what's the role of religion in what you discovered?
Well, both sides. I mean, it both makes it worse and makes it better. And we know about how it makes it harder. People, in a way, Donald Trump with moment 3 in the anti-shaming ritual where he is the victim, he is taking on a kind of Christ-like function of taking on the shame of his followers and suffering, sacrificing himself to that. So he is, in a way, that is one source of, I think, appeal. But let me share with you a little moment of I discovered of the kind of softness of that evangelical church. I met a woman who said, well, I'm a part of evangelical church, and we had one member who was getting over a drug addiction, and his religious community, the church community, had helped him through it. He was now recovering. He was on his way. And then one day in his Facebook page, there showed a picture of him in lipstick. So it turned out he was trans, and that might have been why he kind of hid himself in drugs. And so how in this evangelical community, rural, was this handled? She said this: nobody said, oh, hate the sin and accept the sinner. Oh, one woman, the first woman to reply was, hey, Jake, you should put on my makeup. You do such a nice job. And others followed suit, so that in this, we imagine quite harsh ideology, there are these gentle moments of acceptance.
Where are we with the timing? We're okay? Okay, so the question is, what role does racism play in all this in Pikeville? Now, there are segments of your book in which you do address this in the voice of those in the experience. There are young Blacks in Pikeville. Pikeville is about 85% white, is that correct? Somewhere in there.
93.
So the question is, what role does racism play? Maybe a comment or two about what you've discovered with respect to how whites discuss and talk about race.
Yeah. You know, the first thing I discovered is that they were very insulted to discover on CNN that they were being described as racist. And they were very, they don't think of themselves as racist at all. And the city fathers, they would say, well, we have the first integrated cemetery. It's right up there. Have you been to the cemetery? It's right up there. You know, maybe it's because I'm from Berkeley, California, that they're sending me to the integrated cemetery. But it's also true, and it comes out in some of the interviews, that this feeling, well, Blacks are taken care of, you know, government cares about them, doesn't care about us. And so they're kind of an object of envy. A number of people, you know, it's very interesting what counts as race, because originally there was this group, Melungeon, that are cross-racial. And one guy is very proudly, I'm Melungeon, I thought you'd be interested in that. Racism is there, it is deep, it is abiding, and it fits squarely into this paradigm of shame to blame. It's next to, I would say, immigrants, Blacks and then women are in line to be blamed as the cause of their lost pride.
Now the question is a very complex one. It has to do with the drugs, oxycodone, and its impact upon that area. Most of us know this story, but maybe just a comment from you on what you saw.
Okay, yeah, and maybe just one or two more. Kentucky and West Virginia remain the epicenter of a drug crisis. And as you may know, in the 90s, the Sackler family, who owned Purdue Pharma, actually was almost like prospecting for coal. They were prospecting for pain because they had to sell OxyContin, which is a pain reliever. And they sold it with a lie that OxyContin was not addictive, but OxyContin is highly addictive and is a gateway drug to um, to heroin. And in the course of my work, I interviewed a lot of felons who had been drug dealers and recovering heroin and fentanyl and OxyContin addicts. What made Kentucky and West Virginia the epicenter was that, first of all, there were coal miners who had injuries and needed a pain reliever. But second, they didn't believe in government regulations. And these were among the least regulated states. So basically Purdue said, oh, the coast is clear. And it doubled the rate of addiction deaths in this area to live in a state that was unregulated.
Did the people you were interviewing have opinions about the governor that were positive or negative?
About the government?
The governor.
Governor of
Kentucky.
Bashir. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So Kentucky has a Democratic governor, Governor Bashir. And this section of Kentucky, Kentucky 5, Eastern Kentucky, did not vote for him. But I heard very polite talk. And actually, Bashir has brought a lot of business into the state. He's Democrat, very popular in other regions of Kentucky and popular generally. Because he's brought a lot of new businesses into Northern Kentucky and Western Kentucky. So if you got in the car and drove 2 hours, you'd get to a very good job. But he didn't bring it into the mountains. Yeah.
Okay. Last question appropriately is, where will you go next?
Yeah, I love to talk to people. I love to interview people and listen to their stories. I'll still be doing that. I'm interested in climate change and who accepts it, who doesn't. I'd like to find some states where it's one way, one place, and another way, another. I might.
Florida.
Florida. Yeah. I might be down Florida. And I'd like to look at children. Yeah, I think it might be next.
Thank you.
Thank you.